welcome viewers again to the series of lectures that we are carrying out on early Indian economic stages. And in the earlier part of this discussion, we spoke about the changes triggered in the later Vedic period, which is say from around 1000 BCE to around 600 BCE, subsequent to its earlier counterpart, that is the early Vedic period or Rig Vedic period. And we were discussing that from now on it is agriculture that seems to have assumed the center stage in terms of economic activities of the people, and there is some kind of a geographical shift also associated. So, if not geographical shift, at least change in the focus of activities from say the Indo-Gangetic divide to Upper Gangetic basin that we get to see during this period. And towards the end of this period, that is towards the end of the later Vedic period, it is the Middle Gangetic valley that assumes the limelight in terms of transformative changes that were of very long term changes, to the extent that some of the features and institutions that got rooted, that are born of this period, continues to the present times of Indian history. And even here, in terms of agriculture gaining roots in this area, you will discover, as we talk about various grains and vegetational growths, you will discover that there is some imprint of past that is still present in the areas that we are talking of, most noticeably sugarcane in western UP and so forth. So, we were talking about the centrality of agriculture, a number of oxen plowed, yoked to the plow for tilling purpose, and evidence of rice, that is vrihi, in addition to several other grains that probably were used during the early Vedic period, but now rice becomes more important, vrihi becomes more important. And though the Atharva Ved continues to be obsessed with prayers for increase in cattle wealth, which is the pastoral, which is the conventional way in which cattle is desired in these hymns, in these prayers to God, but the reality is that agriculture had come to be the chief means of livelihood during the period, and cattle does continue as the chief means of movable property. So now it is the immovable asset that we are talking of in terms of land over which agriculture could be done. So the suitability of land for agriculture is something which is at premium during the later Vedic period. Archaeology also, so over and beyond these literary references where centrality of agriculture can be inferred, not directly spoken of, but can be inferred. But this is supplemented by archaeology as well, because we have findings of the remains of rice at Hastinapur by say around 8th century BCE. But this obviously was a rice of different kind. It was not the untransplanted. It was the untransplanted rice variety that we are talking of till around the 8th century, 7th century BCE. So there is some bit of a difference between transplanted variety of rice and untransplanted variety of rice, because or maybe we will talk about it later. Now, even in the rituals which are spoken of in so many texts belonging to the later Vedic period, it is vrihi, it is rice and not wheat, which probably was already being grown in this area, that are important in rituals. So there is some kind of ritual buttressing, or there is some kind of this importance to rice that is being shown even in ritual terms. And alongside rice and wheat, we also have evidence of lentils and also sugarcane. And this is where I was telling you that there is some imprint of things happening around this time in the present as well. So Western UP, sugarcane is central even till date. And but this sugarcane probably that we are talking of is of wild variety and not of the very domesticated, regularly grown through agriculture variety that was present in this period. Nevertheless, sugarcane is alluded to in the contemporary texts and so forth. When land becomes important, when agriculture, or let's put it this way, when agriculture becomes important, land acquires more value. So land which can grow more grains on it becomes, or is at premium, commands more premium. So one can very logically ask that if land had become so important, if agriculture had become so central to the life in later Vedic times, was there private ownership of land, or at least private use of land? Private ownership of land would be somewhat a far-fetched question to be asked in the later Vedic times, but was there private use of land, or is it that land was available in plenty and so anyone and everyone could go and start growing something, and that's how it was? But it seems that there is something happening around this issue, and so probably now land is privately used, although it had not become a commodity to the extent that it could be bought and sold or transferred to others. So there is a communal control that is exercised the way it was exercised over other assets of importance. So there is even the provisioning of granting land to someone, but there are speed breakers, there are problems there. So the consent of the clan, of the entire tribe is perhaps a must before some land could be transferred or granted to someone else. And this is something which is referred to in Shatapatha Brahmana. The king, obviously, conventionally it's the Kshatriyas who were the kings, or the Rajanyas who were the kings. So at this point of time, if you visualize the later Vedic king, don't you compare it with the absolutist monarchs or powerful monarchs like Bimbishar, Ajatashatru, Ashok, Chandragupta Maurya, and so forth. But they were nothing more than glorified tribal chiefs till this period, because the communal control is having a very tight grip on whatever decisions that the monarch could take. And the grant of land, as you can see in Shatapatha Brahman, is studded with the provision that the clan's consent has to be achieved or taken before granting it to someone. Subsequently, you don't find such restrictions of clan consent, and that tells you about the dissolution of clan grip over political decisions or economic decisions. However, despite these references, there is no actual instance of land grant. In fact, when something like this is attempted, the earth goddess refused to be transferred, and that means that the consent could not be taken. So there are these checks already in operation. The communal control of the tribe over the decisions of the king, and as you proceed closer to the present, you will find that king is coming out of that grip, that political grip of the community, and he is becoming more and more absolutist in his approach and power exercise. In terms of social division, in terms of social profile, of course, we keep hearing of the priests or say Brahmins, the warriors, the Rajanya or Kshatriyas, the Vish, the common people, and the Shudras who are doing some menial jobs of service related jobs. Now, in this profile, in this largely one profile or larger one profile, earlier scholars like say Keith would argue that the first two orders had large estates worked by slaves and serfs, and the other two orders, that is the Vaishya and the Shudras, are the ones who are the toilers, whereas the first two orders, the Brahmins and Kshatriyas, are the ones who are the masters. But this kind of generalization perhaps might not be true in Indian scenario. It's least likely that the first two orders had large estates worked by slaves. Such evidences are hard to come by. In fact, the term karmakar, which stands for hired laborer, does not even occur in the Vedic text. So it is only subsequently that we get to hear of the karmakaras who are hired laborers or wage laborers. So there's no question of slavery as an institution being in existence in Indian conditions. Perhaps it was also not required on account of plentiful availability of arable land. Anyone who could clear the land around him got the right to cultivate over it, and so there is no scarcity of arable land the way in the medieval times Europe seems to have undergone, and so there is that Eurocentric bias coming in the form of such assessment. It seems that largely people possessed only that much which could be maintained with their family labor. And it is in this context that you subsequently, not in this period, but by around say the end of the later Vedic period of 6th century BC onwards, you start hearing of the institutions of Gahapatis. And they are rich people. They are the ones who are looking after their household and having a lot of wealth. They are taking care of the agricultural operations alongside trade-related activities and gaining a lot of money, making a lot of money out of it, perhaps also using karmakaras to work on their fields as wage laborers and so forth. But that's a subsequent development, and that cannot be applied to the later Vedic period as such. Certainly, therefore, there seems to be no direct appropriation of grains from slaves, but only a share of whatever the Vish or the Vaishya produced in the form of crops. These peasants had to part with a share of their produce and deposit it with the Samagrahitra. Now, Samagrahitra here then goes on or can serve as a prototype of say agricultural tax or agricultural tax official. So I'm still not saying that it is a full-fledged state in operation with bureaucracy assigned specific duties, say agricultural tax collection, so forth. But given the fact that this is what goes on to become reality, say around 6th century BC in the form of territorial states of Mahajanapadas, Samagrahitra can serve as a prototype of what was to happen subsequently in the domain of agricultural tax and tax officials. Alongside the centrality of agriculture and some tax officials or agricultural tax or some kind of some share of it coming to the king or other officials is concerned. Alongside this, we have a host of arts and crafts referred to in the context of Purushamedh sacrifices. One cannot say that this is pure economic division of labor that is unfolding, leading to a transformative push to the economy in the direction of urbanization and cosmopolitanization and so forth. But what we are saying here is that since they are all referred to in the context of a sacrifice, a yajna, so only limited interpretation with reference to its economic pertinence can be made. Nevertheless, now these activities and social groups are perhaps being identified with specific works. For example, there are smelters, dhamatra, there are smiths or carpenters, karmara, who are mentioned. Weaving is alluded to as a very general kind of activity, not actually signed to one particular section, but nevertheless weaving is alluded to or is referred to as a specific work. There are leather workers, there are pottery makers, there are jewel workers. They are all referred to in the later Vedic sources, and that tells you about the range of activities that can be discerned in the later Vedic times over and beyond cattle rearing and agriculture. Similarly, since we tend to associate artisanal activities, art and aesthetics related activities and craft activities with towns more than villages, so Nagar or Nagarin, those who lived in Nagars or town dwellers, they are also mentioned in the later Vedic sources. Towns like Kaushambi, Koshal, Vidarbh, they are all mentioned, and they go on to emerge as towns by the end of the later Vedic period. So they are very much there. Archaeologically, Ahishatra, archaeologically Kaushambi, archaeologically Hastinapur, they can be attested to having emerged as towns or cities by the 6th century BCE. So what is alluded to in literary sources finds some resonance in archaeological findings as well, particularly with reference to these towns. Now, the good question to ask is, were these towns emerging as seats of political power, or they emerged as towns because they happen to be the centers of arts and craft production? Now, historically, generally, in activity terms, it is presumed that urban centers emerge on account of non-agrarian economic pursuits, and subsequently the political brass or class tries to have some or exercise some political control over it in terms of its revenue generation from the range of activities that typify a town. But in the later Vedic period, in Indian scenario, we are not very sure whether these centers, the towns that are mentioned, or they are archaeologically profiled, whether they emerged because their USP was arts and crafts production, or they were important urban areas because of political clout, political importance, because kings lived there, because most of the kinsmen of the king lived there. So that's still a question that can be intelligently asked with reference to these urban centers. Later Vedic sources make distinct mention of the sea and the sea voyages. Arts and crafts we have already discussed. So when sea voyages are being undertaken, or oceans are mentioned in these texts, what is pushing the writers to mention them? One is not very clear. And if it is the centrality of arts and crafts that is stimulating commercial enterprise or commercial, you can say, push, then it can be stretched to mean something more substantial as well. Largely, the picture that we get is that by the end of the first half of the first millennium BCE, say 500 BC or say 600 BC, at least in the Indo-Gangetic divide and the upper Gangetic basin, pastoral and semi-nomadic way of life is increasingly replaced by agriculture, and obviously the nomadic way of life continues as a supplement to agriculture, but it is agriculture that has come to assume the center stage. In terms of settlement, and this is attested through archaeology, we have several settlements that continued from the early Vedic period down to the later Vedic period, although now say from 1000 or 900 BC onwards, their size, the settlement size is bigger, so there is expansion, and there are new artifacts being found in the total assembly that a particular site gives to us in terms of artifacts. So now we have painted grey wares found alongside iron. So painted grey ware cultures, they were pre-existing in the Vedic times, and now they are being found alongside iron artifacts. So iron usage is taken to by these people without any rupture, without any archaeological hiatus. So it's like all of us have made very swift transition from using basic telephony to mobile telephony, from mobile phone to smartphone and so forth. So we are the same set of people. In one generation we have been switching over to new technologies, and some older technologies that were part of our childhood are obsolete now and so forth. It's not that fast-paced pace of change that I'm alluding to here, but what I'm saying is that there is no rupture of culture here. It is the same set of culture, it is the same set of people who have perhaps taken to new technological artifacts or devices or information and practices in the upper Gangetic basin, iron being so central to it. Politically, if you find references of Rajasuyas and Ashwamedha Yagya being performed by the king in association with the priests, then it is not only a political statement that the kings are making in the later Vedic times. They also serve another function. These Rajasuya and Ashwamedha Yag's also happen to be the occasion for redistribution of material surplus. So the common people who brought something as gifts to the king, and this was expected, the king also had to give something back to them. And in the total transaction, it is the non-producing class which obviously ends up having little more than what they had to give, and this is how redistribution is happening. This is how class formation is happening. This is the asymmetry that you get to see from largely an egalitarian redistribution of wealth in the early Vedic times. And this is how some people are, some sections of society are coming to have more wealth as compared to some who had to dish out something as gift, subsequently as tax to the kings and to the state. Cattle continued as medium of exchange, but metal objects, perhaps nishk and shatamana, which are referred to in these texts, may be considered as prototype of future metallic coins, that is punchmark coins. So one is not very sure that what they stood for, but there is a strong possibility that they might be facilitating some bit of exchange, at least luxury items or high value transactions. Nevertheless, there were certain obvious handicaps that the later Vedic economy suffered from. For example, limited use of iron in craft and agricultural operations, iron ore non-availability, could be a reason for it, because good iron ore could be had only when they reached the southern part of Bihar, present-day Bihar, say Jharkhand area, and where you have good quality iron ore and timber also, because pyrotechnology is extremely essential for iron smelting, for iron metallurgical operations. Till now, till say later Vedic period, it is only wrought iron that is being produced because of pyrotechnological handicap, in the absence of good quality timber. Say 1000 or 1100 degrees Celsius temperature could be attained, not beyond it, but good quality iron will require 1200 degrees Celsius and above for producing good quality iron, and that perhaps was a handicap till they reached the southern part of Bihar, say around 6th century BC, and that is why behind the ascendancy of Magad as the most important Mahajanapad, these reasons are cited because of its closeness to Gaya and Singhbhum area, or the present day Jharkhand area, which are so rich in iron ore and good quality timber. Vrihi, which is rice, is also called Shashti. Shashti means 60 days, so it takes 60 days to ripen. And in the absence or awareness about transplantation of paddy, there is obvious limitation, because the average acreage of paddy, transplanted paddy, is significantly high as compared to untransplanted paddy. So these are the obvious handicaps with which the later Vedic society transacted its life, and as we proceed, we find those handicaps also being taken care of, but that took the economic trajectory to a different level altogether, and that is something that we will talk about in the subsequent stage of economic change. Thank you.